We're standing in the chapel of the Imperial Society of Knights Bachelor, and the Society, in consultation with the Cathedral, has commissioned a new painting which will be dedicated in a few days' time. The painting is of St. Martin, the patron of the Society, and also a saint very local to St. Paul's, in that our local church, St. Martin's in Ludgate, also down the road we have St. Martin in the Field, so very much a local saint to the Cathedral. And I'm standing here with Hughie O'Donoghue, who is the artist of this new commission. Very good to see you, Hughie. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about the commission and how it's been taking up your hours?
Certainly, yes. Well, the commission, I was invited to make a suggestion for the commission, and it appealed to me because it's not unlike other things that I've done in my work. Which is to make a painting that in a sense meditates or contemplates on events in the past. And St. Martin was a figure I actually didn't know very much about before engaging with the commission, but he's a very interesting character. He's a young man, and he has a moment of transformation really when he encounters this unfortunate destitute man, and he divides his cloak. So what I wanted to do essentially was to try and bring that subject into the present, because I think the essentials of the story, the essential ingredients of it are timeless. It's about charity and imagination really, being able to imagine and understand the plight of another individual. It's about compassion, and so what I tried to do in the painting was to make it believable for the here and now, so that it might possibly be something you could see in the street outside. So that the painting was pared down to its essential components, which are the figure of St. Martin and the beggar, and I used models of people who I know and have known for many, many years in the painting. And the other ingredients are the action, the dramatic severing of the garment, which provides the colour and the drama in the painting. But so I tried to keep it as simple as possible. And what I had to remember is that this is a public work of art, yes, not a private work of art. When I make private paintings, I only have me to keep happy. On this occasion, there's more than that involved. So there were different constituents in this. But what I felt was vital in the painting was that it was readable and understandable, so that even if a young child looked at it, they would actually understand the message of the picture.
So just to remind us of the facts, St. Martin is a 4th century saint. We know a lot about him because his friend Sulpicius wrote a life of him not long after he died. What I find interesting is a lot of the depictions of Martin, say like Van Dyck's depiction, you get the rather well-to-do soldier on his horse, you know, throwing down half of his imperial cloak to this rather sad-looking man. Actually, what Sulpicius tells us is that Martin, who was not yet baptized, he was training to be baptized. So he had Christian commitment, but he was still under formation. And he was giving away all of his belongings and clothing every day. And at the end of one day in winter, he finally came to this man. And the only thing he had left on him himself was his cloak. And it was then that he cut it in half and gave it to the man. Of course, then they are the same. And it was then, that night, that he has the famous dream where Christ says, actually, Martin, who is not yet baptized, clothed me. And I think this is a even more subversive and radical story than, of course, it's almost too uncomfortable that we've had to depict it in other ways. And I love St. Ambrose's comment that Martin raised the banners of pity in a harsh time. And that's why I think this is a very important painting for us at the moment, you know, where the times are quite harsh, I think, for compassion. And so could you just introduce us now to the work a little bit?
Well, yeah, absolutely. First of all, I've tried to keep it rich but simple so that you can actually see the painting from St. Paul's, more than 100 yards away, I think you can see it. So that was the reason for the quite strong formal the bands of the picture that establish a kind of presence, but they also echo some of the stone that's here in the cathedral. And I specifically had it was meant to symbolize the gates of the city, really, or the bars of the city, that the haves and the have-nots. Specifically, the greys that are used in it come from the Cathedral of Oviedo, which is a particular favourite of mine. The external Cathedral of Oviedo has bands of warm grey stone around the side of it, so that was the inspiration for that. The two figures in the painting are meant to be a young man and an old man, again symbolizing haves and have-nots, or a more the virility of youth and the difficulty of age, so of aging. And they're linked with this serpentine cloak that wraps around the two of them and forms this compositional device. And the cloak is all the rich colour goes into the cloak, which is made in Chinese vermilion and glazes of alizarin crimson. So it's meant to be rich and opulent, and to contrast against the figures. And so in the figure of the beggar, where there's a lot of flesh exposed, it's deliberately again put against this neutral ground to show the vulnerability of flesh. Again, this is something that is part of the subject. The idea of the destitute being vulnerable, particularly to extremes of temperature, to heat like we have at the moment, or to cold, as in the case of St. Martin. So all those things I've tried to put into an image that is essentially simple. And the sword which cuts through the cloak is, again, it's not a particular sword, it's meant to just be evocative of a blade. But the face of St. Martin is reflected in it, and so it's essentially a simple image.
I mean, the two things that strike me about the older man is he's looking at this cloth as if he's never seen anything like it before in his life.
Yes.
That this is incredible.
Yes.
But also it's now going to become necessary to keep him alive.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, of course, we're in this city where blades are a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
They're killing people on our streets every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet here is a blade being used for exactly the opposite.
Yes.
This is a blade being used properly.
Yes.
To half, to distill somebody's stuff, so that it can be shared equally. And I love that sort of reinterpretation of what blades might be for and what weapons.
Absolutely. Well, St. Martin as well is making this transition from being an elite military cavalry officer to I think he ultimately becomes a bishop, doesn't he?
He became a bishop, yes, and didn't want to be a bishop.
Yes.
They say that they were so keen to have him as a bishop that they went looking for him, and he was hiding in a shed full of geese.
Right.
And when they when they got near, they heard the geese making a lot of noise, and they found him. And that's why often Martin has a goose sometimes in the painting, because a goose gave him away, and eventually he said, "Oh, okay," and they made him a bishop. We do things a bit differently now in the Church of England. But, so finally, can you tell us a bit about the face of Martin, which is very strong and striking, I think?
Well, as I said earlier, when I make my work, I tend to draw on stuff that is I have to feel something about the figures or the subject matter. I have to find some key to sort of open up the subject, and the model for St. Martin is my son. So I got him to pose at various times in this. He's actually a very good model, but essentially I wanted to convey something that's almost that there's a feeling that there's something felt about these figures, and so St. Martin is he's a young man. He's got all the potential that young men have, but what I wanted the face to convey was a sense of compassion. That's what. It's as simple as that. So he's looking down. He's focusing on the act that he's doing, on this severance of the cloak, but it's and it's an act of concentration. So that way the figures interacted. For a long time, I considered whether the gaze of St. Martin should be directed towards the beggar or not. I decided not, because I felt there was actually more drama to be had from them engaging, concentrating on the actual act, on the sever. So there's two figures concentrating on this act. So that was my thinking. But in any painting, ultimately, if it's going to be successful, a certain amount of the subconscious takes over. So if I'm trying to sort of manipulate the viewer too much, I feel that's not going to be successful. What I have to do when I'm painting is focus on the painting and concentrate on the painting and be as unself-conscious as I can in making the painting. But there is a kind of a kind of nimbus or a glow around St. Martin, so which is was something that came in quite late in the day, but it was about emphasizing the figure of St. Martin in the painting, and there's a kind of subliminal message with that, which tells you something, I think.
I love the fact that the model's your son, and we know that towards the end of his life, when people met Martin, they all went away, and they always called him our Father Martin.
Oh, right.
Almost as if the whole cycle of life is captured here a little bit. Yes. It's a marvellous painting. I think it's going to be a real valuable installation to the cathedral, and it's going to be looked at by all our visitors, by our pilgrims, by people who want to come and be prayerful and reflective in this chapel. And I think the messages that it's resonating are so important in our present day, and I want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Canon Mark. Appreciate that.